Today is our last day of modeling. We're going to do cultural modeling when we get started, although even before we get started with that, we're going to let everybody get into groups and do the uninsultability pattern that we did not finish up the other day, so that'll be first on task. So in just a few minutes, we will get into the coaching groups. You'll spend 10 to 13 minutes in the coaching group, and then just immediately find a partner and do the uninsultability pattern. And if you need to ask, what was those steps? We can review those for just a moment. And then from there, we will do the cultural modeling. Tomorrow begins meta-trance. So we put that right in the middle so that if you need a break and some refreshment and the ability to go somewhere else, go away, we can do that in the middle. So we're going to have 2 days away in the next couple days. Your body will be here, but your mind will be somewhere way, way far away. But it'll be a lot of fun. The trance days are a lot of fun. And the homework assignment for early this evening, if you haven't got your induction begun, your script begun for Personal Genius, that's what we'll start working on the next 2 days, the script for Personal Genius. We've got 1 or 2 more coming in this evening, and we'll have them go through the Personal Genius pattern so that they can begin their script as well. And if you've got one script done, you may want to pick out another focus state of Personal Genius, a mastery that you'd like to also have that scripted out so that you have the language for how to go into that state. That's the design, how to use language, how to use hypnotic language patterns, the meta-model language patterns, so that we can put ourselves into just very effective focus states. And so that's the design for that. So the next 2 days will be a lot of language work. We'll be doing language work, but also accessing the state of a meditative state, a trance state, a state where we can really access all the other parts of the mind and body to access Personal Genius, and then to automize it in the sense of just making it automatic, and we can go there very, very quickly.
Also, while you're out doing the exercise, you're going to find an evaluation sheet on your chairs. And,
we have evaluated you, and so this.
Yeah, we've evaluated you. Now we'd like you to evaluate us. No ticky, no laundry. We don't get an evaluation. You don't get to travel tomorrow in your mind.
It's a certificate.
So anyway, these will be on your chairs when you return from the exercise. So please fill them out and leave them right here on the corner of my desk.
I would like to know who would like to get together some evening.
I'd like to know who would like to get together some evening to focus on how to use these skills for children.
Oh. Okay.
And also ask you and the coaching staff for what evening you think would be good for us to do so. But I'd like to take perhaps 1 hour of the practice, 2 hours, take 1 hour and meet with the people who do apply it with children and want to learn more and just how to put our brains together on how to refine strategies, because I use a whole lot of them, and I know in this group of people there are more strategies that I don't yet use that I'm dying to use.
Okay.
So
may I suggest organizing it the way we've done in the past, and that is that we have the dinner meal here for those people that are interested, so that you've got a block of basically an hour and a half to do it while you're having dinner. That has worked pretty well for both the one I did for health, and we did it over lunch with Alan with ADD, and I can organize it. So I'll just make you responsible, Tim, for getting a sign-up list, and then I'll bring a menu in. You can order off the menu. And then I'll get that organized to be done in this room between the two.
that might work. My intention for it was to have people who are currently doing it get up and model what they do. And if we're eating, that's going to be hard.
So what if we do both? What if you begin with a conversation and just have a conversation as to what the range of things, and then a night or two later that night or the next night, spend another hour with what you're talking about.
Okay.
Would that work for you?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So we could do that tomorrow night, I think would work, or the next night.
Sure.
So how many hands were there for one?
Yeah, so basically what I...
Terrific.
14.
Terrific.
I'll make up a sign-up sheet and give it to you.
Sunday night.
Sunday night?
Okay. I'll make up a sign-up sheet, and then I'll let you be responsible for it, but it'll
That's
be
fine.
up here on our desk.
That's fine.
This is part of that self-organizing process that we really do encourage. So if you have something, kind of a passion like Tim has and want to do something like this, we can certainly make this happen. Thursday night will be another party night at my house. Pizza party Thursday night, so that's
Next Thursday.
about a week from now. Well, the next one, yeah.
Is this new behavior for you, Michael?
There will be no wedding. Wild and wonderful things are happening in the field of neurosemantics. A couple of days ago, I received from Ukraine a letter, to actually 2 or 3 emails from Anatoly. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name right. I'll meet him and Oskana in Moscow next summer. But he has just been following the website. He has just been downloading all 2,000 pages on the website and studying it, working on it, translating it into Ukrainian or whatever the language is there. He has now, and beginning September 1st, he will be offering 200 hours of neurosemantics to the second-year students specializing in law. He has set up a neurosemantic laboratory that consists of himself and his colleague Alexander Bernard, who supports him. And he is planning to take all the stuff on the website and create the first neurosemantic book in Ukraine, translating my articles from the website. So he was asking permission to do that kind of stuff, and et cetera, and then wondering how he could do certification training. So he's going to meet me in Moscow next September, maybe in Brussels next summer. So you just never know what's going on, what people are doing with it.
Thank the Lord for a World Wide Web. How many of you, the website had a big impact on you being here? Now tell the story.
We would want to take a few minutes, just kind of open frame before we get into the coaching groups. I did pass out a modeling template. I thought it was in the manual, and I looked and it wasn't in the manual, but it's a modeling template that I've been using, and we've been using the last 2 or 3 years in our groups, just a way of sorting out, looking for information, beginning at the primary state with behaviors and some of the things that are first there, and then looking for focus, looking for states, looking for the frames. And it's just a real simple template that kind of gives a 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of process as we think about modeling.
Can I have a show of hands of people who don't have it, so I can...
There was just 3. The last 3 came in.
Bring me one, Steve.
And then a few coaches.
Solid.
When did you get it?
As we started this morning. I ran 25.
Yeah.
Okay. So open frame.
I have a couple questions.
Okay. Questions? Yeah, we can do questions. Others.
You made a distinction between a goal and an outcome. What was that distinction?
If you think about a goal, a specific goal, I'm going to write a chapter. I'm going to run a mile. A specific goal is kind of like a step. Whereas when you have several goals, I'm going to write a chapter, I'm going to write an article, I'm going to associate with so-and-so and find a writing partner, I'm going to develop a pattern, then all of that puts it in a direction. So a direction is much larger, it's an orientation. Whereas a goal is a specific thing, and the well-formed outcome is more a specific goal, a smart, intelligent goal, step by step, and then you have a measurement of when you've reached it. Whereas a direction is an orientation. So the word direction indicates that this is the way I'm going in life, maybe becoming more resourceful every day. Now, I can have goals that will support that. I'll read so much every week, I'll practice some of these patterns, I'll do this. So you have specific goals that sets up a direction. And in that sense, a direction, I think, is more powerful, more pervasive, more pulling, more compelling than specific goals. So set your goals, and as you do, then notice the direction it puts you as you're moving through life, and if that's the direction you want, or if you need to turn it or move it or orient it a little bit different, so that the direction becomes your frame of mind. What's your general frame of mind? I've got a lot of specific goals, but above and beyond that, and that's metastate language, above and beyond that is a sense of a direction. So that if I never get to my goals, that's fine. Because the orientation is a higher level experience and is, in that sense, more valuable even than the specific goals. The specific goals helps me. And it seems to me that there may come a time when you'll do less goal setting and thinking about the to-do list, because you just have a general orientation. And it's self-organizing.
That's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened.
In this
Start organizing, you start doing that, and once you start doing that, you'll find a direction going, and as the direction goes and you fulfill those directions, so many things will start opening up to you that you're going to have to prioritize. Correct?
In the 7 matrix model, the whole is in the part, and the part is in the whole. Hold on. Yeah. If you could just recap that a little bit. Thanks.
Well, that was a great recap for yourself. But what does it mean? This is where we shift our thinking to thinking systemically, that instead of thinking about a part and then the whole, or what part of me, as if the part is apart from the whole. That is not a part, it's within the whole, and a facet of the whole, and can be located in the whole, as it were. So this is thinking more dynamically about the structure, so that we can look at inside of everything are atoms, and the atoms are in the whole. The whole is within the atoms, as it were. So holon is that dynamic thing where, and so holography, you can take one piece of a picture of a hologram and you can recapture the whole.
You can see the entire picture in the piece.
So translating that to neurosemantic experience, if we look into the theater of the mind and get one facet, what we would call a submodality feature, that inside there, if we know how to see the whole, that element, we can see where all that's coming from. It's located there, and so it's a holon, because that's going to, it's frames by implication. That would be the other part, and I guess we haven't really spent much time talking about frames by implication, that if I have a little part, then there's all kinds of frames by implication that exists because of all the supporting presuppositional structures. And so the whole is in that part, and the whole is expressed in that part, and that part implies and implicates the whole. And so that's what we mean by holon and holography of the mind. And that's why any kind of diagram that has steps, ladders, those kinds of things are just so inadequate for describing these logical, psychological levels of these metastates, because it's far too dynamic for that. And so the whole becomes and gets located in the part. And that allows us to move up and down the levels and move around there to finding those critical holons as we work with something.
Big picture illustration helped me a lot. You got a great big picture. It's holography. You take just one little piece out of it. Take out one piece out of here, and you'll still see the whole picture in the part.
I like the word implicate.
I'm looking for that.
I was looking for being global to represent all of this, all the other stuff, and just implicates it.
Other questions like that, those are excellent questions. Love those challenging ones that make us have to go stretch to find new language for how to express things. And it seems to me in creating any kind of model, half the work is creating a language so that we can talk about it. That because we get beyond words. And getting beyond words doesn't mean that we can't language it. It just means we haven't. and we haven't created the language. Every science pushes its fields by inventing new words so that we can talk about something, and finding the language that maps linguistically us to move out a little bit further, because at first we just do metaphors, and we don't have the language. Then we find more specificity of language and precision language so that we can go there. Then we're just stretching a little bit further. So half the work is finding a language. This was one of the main points of Korzybski. He kept saying that we can build bridges, and each generation we build and engineer better bridges and better architecture, and we keep building on. We don't have to start foundationally again. He says the problem in the social sciences is we don't have the language to start talking about it. And so every generation we invent a new language, or we use some of this old antiquated language that doesn't work. So we talk about mind or emotions. And he said, well, first of all, we need to get all that hyphenated together, mind, emotions, because it's not elementalistic. So a lot of what Korzybski did, and the 7 Korzybskian distinctions we put in the structure of magic, or the magic communication magic book that added to the meta model, were some of these linguistic distinctions that he said are just so essential, from hyphenations to quotes, so that when we're around a semantically loaded word that may be inadequate, we put quotes around it so we know that we're using it in a specialized way, and be careful with it, and multi-ordinality and pseudo words, and so those linguistic distinctions enable us to have a more precise vocabulary. So that's part of what we do to push the edges of any new field.
Here's the graphic from Session Personal Genius on the meta-yes, meta-no pattern, where we talked about frames by implication. That's on your CD.
And I know that in Personal Genius there's also another diagram that has frames all the way up, and frames by implication all the way up, and we've got a couple of those.
So is there a process for creating a direction state? In other words, do you go to an end result and create a vision of that, a vision, feeling, whatever?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think how I did it was by setting specific goals, and then it just like it generalized. Why is this important? What's my overall intention? So sometimes going up the intentionality. What is my intention? What am I hoping to do? Sometimes it's by going global and just playfully imagining different visions of life, what's possible, and setting that as a possible orientation that I'm going to move in that direction. I don't know maybe even how to get there, don't have the specific goals, but I'm going to let that self-organize and pull me and let emerge whatever emerges. If you're more global, that may be the way to do it. If you're more detailed, you may want to start with specifics. That's really important, valuable, and then chunk up, go meta on all of that until you find some of those intentionalities, and you have a sense of direction. Using the ecology question and the quality controlling, if I keep doing this and doing all of this, what direction is it putting me in? And is that the direction I really want to go, or would I like to maybe nudge it in a little different direction? Because a lot of times our goals have immediate satisfactions for different things, but it's really not the direction we want to go in. And so depending upon if you like to do inductive thinking better and reasoning than deductive, there would be a couple different kind of patterns for setting that.
So it becomes a self-correcting mechanism.
It becomes even self-correcting, that I start here and then I discover more. That's why a direction oftentimes will be a path, and it'll curve and it'll twist rather than being a highway. And so part of doing direct pathfinding or path discovery or inventing is that we just invent it as we go. Now I know the general direction Bob and I have set for neurosemantics, but where it's going to go, how it's going to go, what's going to happen. We've got some specific goals, but then we change some of them, and then we do some more, so that it becomes self-correcting and self-organizing.
I'm thinking about a specific example of a holon as a frame about intuition. So, for example, when I look at a picture that a child has drawn, and I am looking at a sample of what that child's projections about the world are, and then I fantasize, imagine, mind read something out there that turns out to be somewhat accurate about this child? Am I, in a sense, experiencing that kind of process? Does that make sense?
Like a good example of that. And a little bit later this morning, when we do the social panorama, we can see that same dynamic occurring when we work with the social panorama and what is applied at the larger level. Good questions. Other questions? Other excellent, challenging questions.
Some of the best learning takes place like this.
Never hesitate to ask questions that even call into question any of the paradigm we've been presenting. Because what we said yesterday about you create a model and then you see where you can disprove it is part of what makes it more solid, more real, more firm, and opens up for new learning. So, don't hesitate. Don't hurt. You're not going to hurt my feelings. You're not going to hurt Bob's feelings by asking those kinds of hard questions. We'd rather hear it from friends.
Yeah. Have a book written about it.
Michael, when you're recording Korzybski, you talked about pseudo words. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Korzybski said that there are a lot of words that they look like words and they sound like words, but they're not real words. They're pseudo words. They're spell marks and noise. So the word failure might be a pseudo word. He illustrated with the word heat, so that physicists for centuries went looking for heat, because heat is a substantive or a noun, so they went looking for it, and it was a pseudo word. And when science finally found the source of it, they found thermodynamic energy, and it was a process. It was a relationship between two things, and there was not a substantive thing called heat. And so he illustrates that, gives lots of examples historically of people looking for heat and never could find it because it was a pseudo word. He illustrates with unicorn. He says in the field of zoology, unicorn is a non-referencing term. It references nothing. In the field, context, in the field of mythology, it's a referencing word. It's a real word. Because you can find references in mythology to unicorns, but not in the field of zoology. So you go to the zoo, where's the unicorns? I don't see the unicorns.
So does that mean that words or language
that are specific to a particular domain, like in this case unicorn and mythology, really fall into the category of pseudo words if they have no application in other domains?
It's not application, it's non-referencing.
Okay.
So this is different from what John and Richard did when they talk about non-referencing. It's like the reference is not there. We haven't specified the reference, but there is a reference somewhere. But in a pseudo word, there's no reference. Now, references can be actual references like unicorn, or it can be conceptual, logical references, so that we have a reference in our mind about something. So logical relationships are actual existence or logical existence. And those words would have a reference. But then there are words that refer to nothing actual or logical. And that's what he meant by pseudo words. So a pseudo word, you cannot find the reference because there is no ultimate reference to it.
So how would nominalizations fit in there?
Well, nominalization is just the naming of an actual reference. We name it and label it. So here's a set of actions, and we can put a label or name on it. And if the name or label is a verb, then we've mapped it fairly accurately because there's a set of actions going on. But when we name it as a noun, so emotion is a nominalization. Emoting, feeling, would be the verb. So that's a nominalization. And so that differs in that sense. And of course, a multi-ordinal word is a nominalization that can be used at many, many different levels of abstraction.
So heat has a meaning to me, but no reference.
Right.
That can happen.
So first of all, it's a nominalization. It's a nominalization of a process, but it's misleading. It's pseudo in the sense of it's misleading, and so that's what he meant by a pseudo term, that there's no actual reference. that there's thermodynamic energy, which is a relationship of two objects in motion. So what you actually have referenced is two objects in motion, and out of that relationship comes energy.
So therefore, it occurs to me that diseases and mental disorders are pseudo words.
Yeah, those would be.
Because when you can take, for example, hypertension and changing it into a verb, because in fact that's what's occurring is you're hypertensing. You're not hypertension. You're using a pseudo word and a nominalization.
Yeah. So sometimes the distinction between nominalization and pseudo word may be a little fuzzy barrier there. So William Glasser, Dr. Glasser, in his work on reality therapy, control theory, and all that, refuses as a medical doctor for people to use any nominalization. He puts it into heart attacking, back aching, panicking, and so into verbs. And he comes from a non-NLP perspective, and yet ends up at that same place to put it back into action. And if there is a referent, if there is an action, a person is creating dis-ease inside their body, then there is a reference, there is something going on, and so it's a normalization. So it does have a referent, or heart attacking, or panicking or something. So there is a referent in that sense. So, but when we get more complex, like mental disorders, first of all, we have to take disorders, but disordering, which Bob and I did in structured personality and figuring out people disordering. So, but then mental. That's that elementalism of, because it's mind, body, emotion disordering. But when we come up with that little short phrase, mental disorders, as if it's a thing, that is more of a pseudo term, because it's like, well, what are you referencing? Because there's so many complex processes, and it's left out context. It's left out so much of the whole context and referencing.
So let's turn up the heat here for a second. So heat in everyday conversation is pseudo word, but in terms of physics, it's not. It's exactly defined.
Well, that's what Korzybski, heat as everyday term would have a referent. What we mean is temperature.
Temperature times a change in entropy. It's really complex.
Yeah, it is complex. But when you go to physics, then heat becomes very inadequate as a scientific term.
In physics, it's exact, but outside, it's not. So I know exactly what it is. I can define it, and I can measure it.
And what you're actually measuring is thermodynamic energy.
Yeah, it's heat. Yeah.
And so we can summarize it as heat. I'll show you. In fact, I brought Korzybski with me today, so I'll show you the truth, because he goes page after page after page on this subject.
Does he mention entropy?
And
does he mention Korzybski versus Pascal? I'm going in the ring, ring the bell. My money's on Pascal. I'll teach you to model dead people.
Certainly, he has a meaning also to that word.
Right.
Omar.
Yeah.
Larry than Omar. Go ahead.
Well, it seems to me that all words then are pseudo words, because we're trying to nail a thing down,
right,
but it's just a map.
It's never
going to.
It's
just
always
like
a map.
Einstein finally came up with the unified field theory, because they tried to find a particle, an atom, but they found it was never there. It was just a possibility.
Right. So at some level, yes, everything is metaphorical and inadequate mappings. It's the linguistic mappings. And what Korzybski meant by pseudo terms is that while all terms have, to some extent, that factor, there are some words that are just spell marks and just noise, and because we can't point to anything. We can't point to chair. I mean, it just, even at the macro level, yes, at the sub-microscopic level, there's no chair there. There's a patterning of energy, a dance of electrons. The universe thinging is how general semantics describes this. The universe is thinging, which I kind of like. Thinging.
Singing?
No, it's singing.
Singing. All there, think about it. We're all singing.
That would be all the abstractions then? Everything abstract? Would qualify then for that category?
No, not everything, because there also, not only is there actual existence, that is, and of course at the macro level, which we live at, our nervous systems cannot pick up the submicroscopic level of reality. We wouldn't know that. In fact, a lot of that is still theoretical. A lot of that is still theoretical, and a lot of divisions about an argument in physics about how to even think about all of that. But at least we can point to a referent, an actual referent. Then there is logical reference. So it has logical reference in a system of thought, and we can point to that in our mind. So there's logical existence and there's actual, and that's what. But then there are things that don't fit either of those categories, and that is what Korzybski meant by pseudo terms. There's no pointing, either in the mind or in space, to the referent, because there is no referent. And so failure would be something that might fall into that category, or other terms. If we say angels watch over my bed every evening when I sleep. Well, point. So it's a conceptual thing, and so we have to put into the context of a belief system or a structure or something like that, and then it can have existence within that domain. If we wanted to talk about the Starship Enterprise, and where it actually is, if it's come back and it's hovering around at the space station, where do you point to? Well, you can't actually point to it. But within a logical system of fantasy, it has existence in that fantasy world, and so may not be a pseudo term in that context, but otherwise it's a pseudo term, and so that's what he meant by that.
One way I understand that is thinking about myself not as a father, but as parenting. When I did the exercise looking at your videos and general semantics and NLP, I stopped thinking about myself as a father and I started thinking about parenting, fathering, and it changed the experiential level completely.
Mm-hmm. The exercise Omar is talking about is describe who you are without using are, is, be, being, been, all the to be verbs, the existence verbs. And so when we do that, we have to go back to verbs. I father, I run, I eat, I learn. And so we go into the verbs rather than the substantive nouns, and I am a father versus I father.
Next time you write an email, write the first two or three paragraphs, eliminate all to be verbs. And next time you write anything, just eliminate all the to be verbs and have an experience.
But I would not recommend you writing your articles or books in that, because the publishers will pull their hair and attack you.
Only Albert Ellis can get away with that anymore.
Yeah. Were you going to retaliate? Retort?
He was putting out on insolubility,
Well, let's get into our coaching groups. We'll do the 12, 13 minutes in our coaching groups, and from there, grab a partner for uninsultability. Everybody ready for that pattern? Our next stop is cultural modeling. That's where we're going to go now. Cultural modeling, I think it's page 249 in your books. 249.
Michael, I'd like to comment something on that.
Okay.
Yes, when I did the change of frames and resources, suddenly the image looked further, so it was automatic.
Okay.
So the submodality moved automatically. So this is a big difference of how the frame changes the submodality. that, for example, Bandler teaches that, okay, just pop in the color or do this or do that, and it doesn't work. You just feel the same. So this was a very good example of how the context or the frame changing the submodalities automatically.
Okay, good, excellent. Yeah, you change the frame and the movie in your mind changes
by itself. You don't have to move anything.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, nice to notice those kinds of things.
I would like to know how you are able, you and the coaches and so forth, to go through the world and turn off all the skills at times, because you know when you're on the phone with your loved ones, your family, it's so easy to want to reframe them constantly with good intentions,
right?
Wanting to help them shift their frames and so forth, if it's health or family or whatever. And sometimes it's hard for me to turn it off.
Well, and turning it off is that balance between caring and caring too much. Because it's not that we want to turn off caring, because we do want to care and love and appreciate, but also knowing when to back off and when we're intruding, when we're trying to get them to be remolded in our image, or what we know is best for them. And so it's caring and caring too much. And so that sense of really respecting another person, to have the freedom to not make us change at this point in time, and to stay in their pain if that's part of the situation, or to have a different set of choices. So I think the frame is respect for other people, to have their right to make those choices, and we can be as persuasive as possible, and also respecting when they've had enough.
Right. How do you do that?
Well, this is where calibration becomes useful.
Could I address, there's a couple of pieces here. One is, a very wise man, I don't know who it was, once said, you cannot be your family's therapist. And secondly, and one of the reasons is because it confuses your roles.
Right.
Are you my dad, or that type of thing? And like Michael said, it's even in the world in general, it's about people asking for help, not you just assuming that they need it.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to respect the fact that some people have a lot invested in their pain, and they may not be ready to get rid of it. So it's a tough line sometimes. You just feel yourself, but you got to stand back.
And so I think always asking for permission.
Yes.
I see that you're having this and this experience, or is someone talking about that. May I do something? Would you let me interact with you and offer you this or that process or idea? And asking permission before we start blurting out. And loved ones who we've opened up our ego boundaries and brought them into our sense of ego boundaries, because we've dropped our boundaries, they've dropped theirs, and then when you do something, it can feel hurtful. It can feel like a judgment, even with the best intentions, because it feels like to them, it feels like we're trying to change them, and most of us don't like it just imposed. So it's that imposition, and so to some extent, it's just being polite and just being respectful to recognize that we've dropped our ego boundaries, so we're wide open to each other. And when someone offers a vulnerability, if we go swish pattern and just dive right in without asking permission.
I'm going to use the example of husband and wife. There's a interesting book out of which one of the most important things I got was Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, is that women frequently want to be listened to, and they don't necessarily want you to give them an answer to their problem. And
well, that's a problem. We need to change these women.
And as a male, when we go asking for information, problem solving, we want somebody to give us an answer. And that is not that is an overgeneralization. Some men and some women vary in that.
Right.
Okay. So it's one of those things where my wife has learned to tell me, for example, I'm not looking for an answer. I just want you to listen to what I have to say.
Yeah.
So building a feedback loop, depending on your own level of sensitivity, is also a useful skill.
Yeah.
giving those who you love permission to tell you to stop.
So this adds another little piece of information. Someone may be talking about a difficulty, but they still have not asked for assistance. They still have not asked for us to do anything. They're just downloading, they're just ventilating, they're just expressing, they're just putting it out to the air and to the universe, and they haven't really asked for help yet. And those of us with male ears tend to hear anything like that as problem to solve. And so the question then becomes, what frame do you need around yourself so that you can just listen and validate and confirm the person without trying to solve? So we may need to turn off those solving frames of mind. And if that's one of your best skills, to solve things and to do problem solving and to recognize patterns, so here we are developing more and more that skill, but also the frame that I don't have to use it, and people have the right to their pain or to their distress or their uncomfortableness, and I can ask.
One of the frames that's been helpful for us and for working with others is to set the frame with friends and family. If you want something from me or if you want me to do something, you need to ask. I'm not going to assume because you're telling me these things that you want something. And then that sometimes gets you a little bit of hot water because sometimes they want you to volunteer, but if you keep that frame, then I don't have to be thinking of a response while they're talking.
No, that's good. That's good. Omar had his...
I used to get into trouble with my wife when
used to.
Well, in the sense I am going to say next, because everything I said in a discussion or anything, she said, "Oh, that's NLP stuff," you know, and that's. So suddenly I realized that the one who is coming to the trainings is me, and the one who is reading is me. So this is for becoming better, not for having conflict. So, yeah, you know, and because the strategy I used to use was, I know this sounds good. You must know it, even though you haven't studied it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I realized suddenly that, hey, wait a minute, I am studying this. She doesn't know, so you know, to put appreciation, acceptance, and not trying to evangelize her. You know, like just.
Yeah. Well, that's a great mind line. This is for me, not for conflict.
Yeah.
This is to become better, not
right.
not have more fights. Yeah, that's a great mind line. Yeah. Yeah. So how did the uninsultability feel when you put that on? Uninsultability? Different? A lot of these more complex states, these meta-level states that have numerous frames on them, caring but not caring too much, learning and wanting and caring about things, but letting other people misunderstand us, criticize us, and framing it as feedback, and really not about me, but about whatever the subject is, or the behavior, or the activity, the speech, rather than about over-identifying with that, and the frame of being fallible, and being okay with our fallibility, being gloriously fallible, and anticipating that, and being wrong and having a good relationship to being wrong. So there's so many different facets that we weave into the fabric of this incantation of growth. Because in one sense what you just did was an induction into a very complex multi-level state so that you could really be at your best when someone is coming at you, so that instead of counterattacking or escalating it, finding out information, seeing what's going on, validating the other person, and those, of course, all these are social skills and interactive skills that allow us to find out what's going on, then decide, do we need to do anything about this, or does this have to threaten relationship? Because if we assume it has to threaten a relationship from the very beginning, then we'll be operating from that frame. But if we assume that there's differences and there's different perspectives, and we can use dialogue to discover, identify, and then find out who to interact with and who not to. And so even setting a frame that I don't have to have an intimate relationship with everybody. That there's some people I just have acquaintance with, and some people more intimacy, and then other people are close partners and associates, and then making the determination also who do I want to give the right to criticize. Because some people will start doing it, and they've got half-baked ideas. They don't even understand what's going on. So we just, we suffer fools gladly. So that's uninsultability, and we've got a couple chapters and a couple of the books on uninsultability. If you want more about that, more kind of ideas about how to build up that state. I think it's really a critical state for anybody who's going to master any field, especially if you're going to be taking effective action to do things, get things done, and make a difference. We are going to be criticized, and if I'm okay with that realization and have some skills ready at hand, then I'll be ready for that.
Good news from LaRue. Remember LaRue?
Yes.
I'll read part of his email. He sent this around to the Neurosemantic Stuttering list. I attended the Accessing Your Personal Genius workshop last weekend in Colorado and can honestly say it was a life-changing event. For me, as background, I stuttered ever since I can remember. In high school, I could not talk on the telephone and often had my sister make calls for me. I never raised my hand in class to ask a question, etc. In the late 60s, I took 2 6-week intensive speech therapy sessions at Elmira College, and once I was fluent for an entire 30-day period. Since then, I have become more fluent by increasing my self-confidence in various ways to the point where, as an engineer at 53 years old, I am fluent in most situations except speaking to large groups, especially our board of directors, etc. So when I heard Linda's story, I decided that I really could use improvement and decided to attend Genius. I was extremely pleased with the entire workshop experience. Michael and Bob and the rest of the coaches and trainers did an excellent job. The other attendees are great people as well. I made a lot of new friends and look forward to staying in contact with them, especially my friend Cindy. The mind is the most complex organ in the body. However, the neurosemantics material breaks down the way it functions in a logical and fairly easily understood fashion. I was able to go to parts of my subconscious mind where I had never been, at least not with this approach and intent. I cannot fully describe the revelations I experienced. I cannot tell you how much I am indebted to Linda for convincing me to go to Colorado. She must be my guardian angel. Then he goes through some of the resources he were able to access and religious resources. And then he says, on the flight to Chicago, I was lucky enough to get a seat by the door, lots of legroom. And when the 2 stewardesses sat down for a break, we started up a conversation. I started to tell them a story about a flight I had a few years ago. Suddenly, the pilot called on the phone. I immediately felt a surge of panic because when she hung up, everyone would expect me to continue my story. I immediately went to the well, and he's talking about the drop down through into his resources. And remembered the feeling, peace, and confidence, etc. I found when we did the drop-down pattern last Saturday night, that's when I met with the group. And when she hung up the phone, I immediately started my story again with complete fluency and without fear. And he has some more stuff. So that's just fantastic. And since this went out, Lynn has received 2 or 3 enrollees for the conference tomorrow. Yeah.
And somewhere in there, he says he now considered himself a person who previously.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Geez, I walked out. Some more illustrations. Then he says, my next challenge is to take what I learned in Colorado and practice the patterns to the point they will automatically squash any impulse to go into a block. I now consider myself a person who previously stuttered Instead of PWS, person who stutters, he has PWPS, person who previously stuttered. The power of the mind is truly awesome. I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
Mr. Swell, read that really great. That's super. That's why we do what we do.
Page 249, 248, modeling cultural phenomena. We are running out of time, so I'm going to have to really put this in high gear and motor on with this. As we look at, well, I'm going to do some drawings on this.
It's more important.
So as we think about this, what we're looking at is how do we model a culture. So first of all, we have to define a culture, and on your book there, the word culture coming from the Latin word cultura, and of course it just means cultivation, and it means a process of cultivating or developing the land. When we apply that symbolically to ourselves, we're cultivating our mind, our emotions, our life, our style, our way of life, our morals, our ethics. And so it's this cultivating our aesthetic and intellectual qualities and all the ways that we think and feel and speak and behave and relate and value. And so all the states and traits and laws and rituals and ceremonies that we develop as a people. So a culture can be a small culture of a small group. It can be a business culture. It can be a family culture. Get two people together and there comes into being a shared reality. Or it can be a national culture, a gender culture, a racial culture. So all kinds of cultural level shared realities come into being. And so as we think about culture, this moves us into, and I've in the Fuller book on modeling cultural realities, I've taken 12 different social models, sociological models, to be able to look at these dynamics and structures that make this up. With regard to this, now we're going to be modeling a group of people. Alfred Korzybski talked about neuro-linguistic environments. And he used this phrase a lot, neuro-linguistic environments. What was the neuro-linguistic environment of your early home life? What was the neuro-linguistic environment of home life or at school? Or the neuro-linguistic environment of a marketplace or of a business or of a nation? So the neuro-linguistic environments that we create. He says, and one of the distinctions he makes is the difference between us and plants and animals as we being time binders. So what creates this is time binding. And his definition of time binding, and that we are a time binding class of life, is that plants bind chemicals to themselves. They root themselves in the ground, and they'll take from the soil chemicals and bind the chemicals into their way of life, and so plants are chemical binders. He said animals are space binders. Animals take the chemicals from the earth and the things that they eat and bind it into their system so that the very cells will bind in chemicals. But animals, unlike plants, animals can move through space and go to where sources of food and drink and so forth and move around. So they bind space into their way of life. They're mobile. Well, we do both of those. We bind chemicals into our system. We bind space so that we can move around to where we want to be, and so space is a part of our sense of life. But also we bind time. What we actually bind are the learnings of people in their nervous system in other times. So what Aristotle wrote, we can bind what he learned in his nervous system. We can bind it in our nervous system. We can take it in and absorb it through symbols. So symbolism is the mechanism that allows us to bind time. So we don't have to reinvent the computer. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to reinvent planes. That we can start to build upon the learnings of previous generations. So time binding is what allows us to solidify learnings, and it's solidified through symbolism. So a great deal of neuro-linguistic environments are the symbols that occur. Of course, language, being one of the biggest cultural phenomenon that is given to us, So we language ourselves, and we learn a language. We learn what to call things and how to name things and how processes work, and that starts the symbolism. But as we look at the neuro-linguistic environment, we recognize there's all kinds of other symbolisms. How we eat, rituals, how we go to bed, how we clothe ourselves, how we greet each other, our sense of space, proxemics. So rituals and styles and ways that we've and previous generations have cultivated mind, emotion, experience is the cultural frames that we are born in. And to not be born into those cultural frames, and especially the language frame, is to not become human. That we're not born human. We become human. And language, because our mind and our consciousness is a language phenomenon. And a child, I mentioned this the other day, a child that is taken away from a family at 8 months old or 18 months old and raised by animals, wolves or dogs, will become a feral child, F-E-R-A-L, a feral child, and will not enter into the world of symbolism, neuro-linguistic environment, and will not become human, and will not know how to do the cultural things of dressing, of eating, of using utensils, of greeting, of knowing who he or she is as a human being. And so the feral children is really a very sad phenomenon, and it's been studied for several hundred years now. Many examples of people like that, and none of them ever lived beyond the teenage years. So this really is a powerful example of how that we have to live in a cultural environment, and our consciousness is language. So one of the logical levels of our mind is culture. And of course the first culture is just the family culture, and then the neighborhood culture, the culture of the other kids we played with, the culture of church and religion and school and marketplace, and the culture of now TV and radio and all the cultural mechanisms of communication that also helps to formulate our awareness of who we are and how we've been cultivated, as it were. So this is the neuro-linguistic environment in which we're born, or the culture in which we're born. And as we start modeling this, then we start wanting to know, how do we create such culture? And the metastate approach to that, metastating these cultural realities, when we metastate ourselves and others within a group, and these metastates grow up, they eventually become cultural values and realities. What therefore shows up as the social constructs of meaning, reality, importance, value starts off on a personal, individual level. And because we can stabilize and solidify these metastates and pass them on to others, then this describes the culture, the society that we're born in, and from which we absorb meta-level mappings of reality, which probably explains why so much of our mind is unconscious and is outside of our conscious awareness. We were just born into it. We absorbed it. And we were metastated. Interpersonal metastating is, if I take a state of anger or judgment and bring it to you, you are invited to take my state and to put it as a frame over whatever I'm attacking inside you. So that's interpersonal metastating. A counselor will bring a state of grace and acceptance and curiosity and wonder and bring it to you. And if you receive that, then we are interpersonally metastating. Tell me more about that. That must have hurt. What was that like? And what do you think about that? Well, framed by implication is, I accept it. I'm not afraid of it. Nothing to be afraid of, just human stuff. Yeah, many people have gone through that. I would have felt that way if I went through that experience. And that interpersonal metastating is setting frames, but it's not overt and explicit and conscious, because the content is where the person would be focusing, but it's setting frames. So the first interpersonal metastating we all received was from mom and dad. So if mom was irritated and just upset and frustrated with her own day, or having little resources, or feeling unfulfilled in her own personal life, and she brings that grumpiness to us as little kids, that's the first thing we start metastating ourselves, because we receive it. And little children tend to personalize and do magical thinking. And so we enter into that first level cultural framing. And of course, as that repeats year after year after year without us having really a sense of running our own brains or wondering, well, mom must be in a grumpy state. You know, at 6 months old, it's hard for us conceptualize that and to put it in place and index it. And so we get metastated culturally, and of course it just becomes the atmosphere. And if Dad is always angry, or if they're always fighting, or if the culture is always saying you've got to do it right, and you can't be imperfect, and I'll spank you for that, and you be seen and not heard. And we get all of this cultural context like a canopy of consciousness, and we just live in that. Never calling into question. We don't have the ego to do that, the ego strength to do that. And we just live here. It sets the emotions. It cultivates us. And it can cultivate us for pathology, or if the parents had gone through Parenting 101 and knew how to give, to take a child into account and give a lot of nurturing and loving and caring and playing and interacting and a rich environment and just and making it a wonderful place, then that's the consciousness that we live in, the canopy of awareness. So a culture is a grown-up metastate, or metastates, multi-level from many places. So Korzybski identified this as a time-binding class of life and our ability to pass on the products and processes that we learn via our nervous system / brain as time-binding. So the first question for all of us is, as we step back and look at the canopy of consciousness in which I have been living, what is the neurolinguistic environment? Is it friendly, unfriendly? Is it safe, unsafe? Do you feel empowered inside of it or disempowered? These are some of the most basic questions, and the ones we deal with in the Personal Genius program, so that we start recognizing that how we map it and the neurolinguistic environment in our mind that we set is going to set that cultural frame. So we begin there. Via time binding, we establish and pass on the structure of shared reality, of meanings, and metastate the frames of meanings, and in the end we have a culture. This description provides us a means now for actually modeling cultures and cultural realities, cultural phenomenons, whether they be family cultures, business, or national cultures. We can discern and distinguish between the actual structure within these larger level experiences. Before we do that, and when I first started thinking about all of this, culture just seems so large, so massive. But now we can demystify it. Culture is made out of the same stuff that we make everything else. Thoughts, feelings, and physiology. And that's all. It's not made out of it's just made out of that stuff, and it gets starts into culture. So that when we think about our culture, the American culture, the European culture, the Australian culture, any culture that we want to identify, we can change that culture. Because cultures are always changing anyway. It's not a fact that they are massive, unchangeable, inevitable facets. They change all the time anyway. And once we know the mechanisms of how we create them, we can uncreate them, and we as change agents can begin to deal with that. So this will demystify what we mean by culture, enable us to specify the elements, the components, the variables, the syntax of quote-unquote culture. So here's another logical level to add to Dilthey's levels. In your mind, not only do you have beliefs and values and spirituality and everything else, but you also have culture, and probably multiple levels of culture about different kinds of groups and shared reality. And now we can start working with that. The model of meta-levels or meta-states or frames puts into our hands a way to model this so that we can identify, and you can see the list there of a lot of things that's going to make up a culture. Beliefs of the culture, values of a culture, understandings of a culture. Probably at the very first, another principle, not only is it made out of the stuff of thoughts and feelings and actions and activities and physiology and rituals and actions and stories and metaphors, but it's also fallible. Now, politically correct, when I went through and got my master's degree, it was a time in counseling, it was a time when being politically correct, you never criticize any culture. I'm going to criticize every culture. Because for the most part, they're all sick. Because it's just human thoughts and feelings. And cultures grow. Cultures evolve. Cultures develop. None are perfect. All are flawed. Some are better at doing some things than others. So So I'm going to violate some political correctness with this whole thing, because every culture is just made out of human stuff. And I'm not going to worship any human culture, because it's not to be worshipped, it's just to be recognized and worked with, just like any other kind of frame that we set. No frame is perfect. Every frame has its limitations and its strengths and its powers, so we can appreciate things about every single culture. I don't know any culture we can't appreciate some things, because it serves the life of the people and allows them to have certain experiences. And every culture has its own challenges and problems, and so I'll criticize the American culture as probably more than anybody else, any other culture, because I know it more. But culture is just a human artifact. And there's nothing divine about it, and there's nothing sacrilegious or to criticize it. So it's the relationships with inside the culture, and relationships between cultures, and the clash of cultures. The clash of cultures is just a frame war, and it can occur at the individual level, the group level, the national level. It's just the clash of frames. There is a culture in the NLP community, and there is a culture that we're trying to create in the neurosemantic community. And all of it is flawed too. And our ability to look at it and to offer a critique of it so that we can make it better seems to me to be the purpose of why we want to do that kind of a thing. Then we get into cultural experiences. And that's what we'll start looking at here in just a moment. One of the lines there talks about power, authority, control, permission, religion, values, morals, ethics. These are group emotions, group phenomenon, and they occur when you have more than one human being together, since being a social animal, being social in our very style of how we experience ourselves. When we come together, we interact, and then out of that emerges such things as authority, control, manipulation, power, politics, economics. All of those things arise. So now we can model economics, politics, sociology, anthropology. So this opens up, I think, really many other fields for NLP. The formula there, and those of you who are with us for Personal Genius will recognize the formula that we're going to start with. It comes from John Searle, and he has this formula there: X counts as Y and C. Here's an X, and this X, which is a brute fact, we would call it sensory-based information, a brute fact in the world. This X, we're going to consider it a Y inside of some C. And, of course, that begins the bare-bone structure of this model, because it is a model. I've put it into this meta-level structure. John Searle does not. But actually, the C, for context, where do these bare-bone, raw data, where does it become a meta-level phenomenon? In what context? Of what context? Of what context? I used the illustration the other day, and it comes from John Searle. A dog sees a man kick a ball down a field of green grass across some white lines. And when the dog sees this man crossing these white lines, he comes to a certain white line, and when the ball goes over, everybody starts yelling, and especially as the ball goes into a little net. Well, that counts as a point. The dog doesn't see a point, because points don't exist out there. But the man kicking the ball and the ball going into the net counts as a point, and he scores. Here's something else that's a meta-level word that you won't see in the real world. So we would recognize these as normalizations. Who is scoring? And in the context of a game, this becomes real, and all the human participants see that, but the dog, Spot, doesn't see any of that. He wonders, what's going on? Because he missed it, because it's a cultural phenomenon. It counts as a point and scores in a game. But if that was practice, the same man kicking the same ball into the same net with the same teams playing each other, it would not count as a point. So what counts as a point and scores is that it's in the context of a game, not practice. And of course, we have other rules of the game. So the game is going on, but the game is authorized by maybe a school, and it's got rules for this game. And the rules will say that a participant who jumps out of the stand and runs down the field, kicking that ball into the net, well, that didn't count, because you have to be a member of the team for it to really count. So we're creating social reality, cultural reality that only exists in the mind, but is externalized at this level. So here's primary state, and while these are meta levels, these meta levels get into it, so it all becomes of one awareness. So that once again, the part reflects the whole, the part has implications to the whole. And so when this part going on and the whole crowd explodes with cheers, our team won the game, all of these terms, and that's why we can say we are a meta class of life who lives at the meta levels and very seldom live just at the brute facts. Spot is living at the brute facts. He doesn't have any of this culture in his head. So he doesn't know what's going on with all of this. But of course, the school has authorized the game, and there's probably an authorizing body and schools and so forth that authorizes that school so that it really counts, so that the team... So we got a lot of cultural terms. And in terms of the meta model, while these are normalizations, even calling these normalizations is fairly inadequate as a way of modeling, because then we can start asking, well, who says it counts? Who's the authorizing body? How did they get authorized? Authorized by whom? At what time? How long are they authorized? So this brings up a lot of cultural facts as we start looking at it. So you can see there at the bottom of 249, the formula, the X is the primary state, the Y is the meta state of the meta state of the meta state, and all the Y's all the way up. It's Y all the way up. Why not? So on top of 250, up the levels we go. The neurolinguistic levels govern human reality, since these are invisible and phenomenological realities that we create by mapping them out. These are all observer relative and tend to be taken for granted, and that's really what gives its power. We just assume it. We just take it for granted. Assume that it's real, and then forget that it's just our cultural reality for that. These symbolic states arise from our assignment of meaning, function, use, performance, status, category. And all of those terms are really important when we want to model cultural things. Meaning. What did the man running down the field, what did that mean? Well, he was playing in a game trying to make a point and score a point inside a particular... That's what it means. Unless it's practice, then he's practicing for the game. And that's what it means. Function. Who gets to have this function? Because everybody is not allowed to be out there doing that. And we have some people out there who are just the referees and just the coaches and other playing other. So there's different functions and the assignment of those status. Who gets to have that status? And can a person have a status without having the right to function? Well, of course, we can have honorary status. Or a president can have the end of his term and step out and no longer has the function of being president. So we say former President Clinton, former President Carter. We say they still have the status, but not the function. So there's status, and then there's status function. And then there's function without status. So that if two cars get into a crash on the highway and people stop and somebody has got the function of being able to take care and do medical care, and maybe they've had some schooling, maybe they've taught themselves, but they don't have the status of a doctor or someone who can give emergency aid. They can have the function without the status. So there's status, there's function, there's status function, performance, and the categories we set. Cyril says this: they do not exist in the world of brute facts. Empirically speaking, there isn't anything there. Empirically speaking, there isn't anything there. They only exist in the world of mind as we assign meaning. So there's a little diagram. The X functions, the brute facts, and then the Y status functions, the intention of what we're intending to do, and the authorizing, and the collective awareness that allows that. So Cyril has distinguished how we assign meanings in several categories, and there's a description there of function, status, function, and how this creation of social reality works. Once upon a time, there was such a thing in the Middle Ages in Europe as knights. And a king or a queen would dub someone a knight. Well, to be a knight, you had to be a man, because then it was just men, a man who could fight. He was a warrior. And he had some horses. You had to have at least 3 or 4 horses. And you had to have a couple people who would follow you. And you had to have land. And if you met all those qualifications, you could become a knight. And so they would be knighted, but a king or queen, someone in authority, would knight someone. A little bit later on in the Middle Ages, several people wanted to become a knight, but they weren't fit. They were past the age. And they didn't really have anybody who was following them out to do battle. And maybe they didn't even have a horse. But they wanted to be a knight. And so there came into existence the ability king and queen started knighting people who did not meet all the qualifications. Not too long ago, the Queen of England knighted some people. And I don't remember if she went through the list. Do you have a horse? Do you have some land? Do you have some people? She just knighted them. I dub you knight. Sir. So there might have been a deed for the land that they owned. Oh. Well, and so then there were other places where they had done some deeds of bravery of some sort. So came into existence that social reality. Well, we create social reality all the time. We go out and vote. And the mind of the people, as they vote in a democratic society, votes into office someone who now has the status and the status function of playing that role, whether it's a tax collector, a city tax assessor, whether it's a mayor, a judge. So we create social reality. We also not only can create it, we can uncreate it. A term can come to an end, or we can vote someone out, we can impeach. So we have these cultural reality formats. At a smaller level, we get married. We have someone who has the role status of performing a wedding or announcing the words, whether a judge or a minister. And so we can say, I now pronounce you husband and wife. But that didn't count when they were just in the rehearsal. They could have gone through all the language. So it's a social reality that is created, and there's the assignment of meaning. Or they can go back in court a little bit later and the judge can say, I pronounce you divorce. I pronounce you. So here's another linguistic distinction that's not in the meta model, and it's called a speech act, when words do not so much provide information, but the speech is the act. And those are examples. I pronounce you. I adjourn this meeting. This meeting is now adjourned. Or I dub thee the ship Queen Elizabeth. And so we call, by our words, we make it so. We make it so by our words. And at the family level, you create social reality when you say, okay, from now on, supper is at 6 o'clock every night around this table. Or you create social reality saying, if you get out of your bed one more time tonight, and because you have the status, parent, you have the status function, and so we call and create. So by speaking, we make it, what didn't exist now exists. And so that's the structure of how we create social reality. You can see some more description of this on the next page, and some examples from money to property to government. And so the level of facts. This means that we have existence and ontology at each and every level that we access, acknowledge, and experience, or what Korzybski called multi-ordinality. This gives us a methodology for meta-level analysis of what's going on. We have brute facts Then we can have social facts, because two people can say, let's go for a walk. So what was a walk now is really a walk. Last night, Anne and Jermaine, we sat down at the table and they said, it's time for our walk. But it wasn't an institutional fact. There are walks. Walk for a March of Dimes. That's really an institutional fact. Because it's not just a social fact of two people taking a walk, but now we've got more people taking a walk for a specific purpose designated by a certain organization that says this all counts as we raise money for March of Dimes. So we have brute facts, we have social facts, and then we have institutional facts. So what kind of a fact is it? At which level? And so it goes up the levels we go. And you can see there classifying and unclassifying. When we classify, we say this X is a member of this class. Think of X in this way, or how else could we think of this? So we are asserting. And when we unclassify, then we say, no, it's just a brute fact. It's just a pure description. It's not meaningful. We take away the meaning. It's just this. And so it describes the event, but no classification. So this gives us the basic structure of culture. So let me stop here, see what you think. Because it may be activating lots and lots of awarenesses as how we can do this. In a business, what counts as a raise? What counts for promotion? What counts for respect? What counts for dishonor in any given culture? And how do you know? And who says? So when we start modeling these cultural phenomenon, then we're looking at this structure. What do you think?
I was thinking that it is like an ontology of language, and that you create realities through conversations, and the only way a culture can remain, in a sense, is when we create trust. My mind was going on as you were talking, and I was thinking that. A culture only can remain when, through conversations, we make commitments. We are going to do this. I am going to do that, and then the trust is trusting each other, make a community real in a society sense.
Okay, excellent.
Well, I was thinking about that.
So trust being a relationship emotion. Because if I trust, then I'm trusting someone, and it's best to trust someone who's trustworthy. Because if I trust someone who's not trustworthy, then my trust will not work out. So a relationship emotion, and so the fabric of any community, based on trust, based on truth, based on honesty, based on forthrightness, based on communication, based on dialogue, based on a lot of those things. And when that breaks down, then the culture is weakened, whether it's the culture of two people in a marriage or relationship, or whether it's the culture of a business. So there are these kinds of emotions and interrelationships that allow something to exist and continue to exist. So culture, and that's why some cultures break down and go away and no longer have any existence, and we just read about how people once interacted and what meanings they did once upon a time give to any particular brute fact. So we can apply this to our home lives. We can apply this to our relationships, to our friendships, to our acquaintances. We can apply this to our businesses, our training centers, our coaching business. Because in coaching, you're creating a culture. And you're designating, this is what this means. In this context, in this context, in this context. So we're building, and that's where we go get credibility. And the more credible it is, then the more it feels like it has a real existence, which is why we go through ceremony and we designate. But it depends upon, well, who gave you the power to designate that? And so it all goes back, and ultimately it's just made out of the stuff of thoughts and feelings and behaviors.
One last thing. I was thinking that we coordinate actions through conversations, and the power of a community stands in the competency to coordinate actions through conversations. I was thinking that an organization is not, I mean, what is an organization? Is a group of people which coordinate actions through conversations to get goals.
Exactly.
If you don't develop the competency to make and keep promises through conversations, coordinating actions, then you don't have any real community in the social sense.
Right. Right. Exactly. So now we can understand how a culture can crumble from within, because people will not be true to their word, not congruent, not trustworthy, so that people's trust in them keeps falling, and so a culture can be degraded that way, or we can go to a culture and set a higher frame that just starts reorganizing everything and set higher meanings that are better than, as good as or better than the old meanings, and people just naturally go there. Because so some cultures just become irrelevant. They just become irrelevant. And so that gives us two ideas of how to do cultural change at any level of what we're working with. And when we don't get meaning, when we don't get significance, when we don't get the states that we want in a set of interactions, once again, that it just falls apart. It becomes more and more irrelevant. And one way to make things irrelevant is to have something much better, which gives me some ideas about cultural change. And this afternoon I want to talk about cultural change and talk about the tipping point, talk about several social change models, and how we can use it as people in business and in the whole field of change and change management, and talk about how we can utilize that. But right now, looking at how it is structured and how it is formatted and how it comes together, every time you use a ceremony, it strengthens the culture. And when ceremonies become less meaningful and we stop using them, so this is the difference between a brute fact. The more you use a brute fact, it wears out. So several of you have been commenting on my bald tires. The more I use those tires, the more they wear out. We wear out brute facts. They just wear, because that's the nature of physics. They wear out. But the nature of cultural reality, the more you use it, the stronger it gets. The more a husband and wife, the more any two friends trust and are trustworthy come through, are congruent, and have more experience with it, the more, you're not going to wear it out. Cultural reality doesn't wear out by use. It wears out by non-use. I mean, talk about two different levels. If you don't know that, because we're not going to wear it out by using it, that will strengthen it.
Yeah, I was seeing it like an energy investment, and the parallels between that and morphic resonance, where you're actually building a resonating or self-resonating system, and failure to continue to tune that system will result in a decay state. A decay state.
So now, here in this country, one of the things occurring is with cable TV, and talk shows and talk news. The more cables, the more ways of getting information from many other places. The traditional 3 TV stations in this country are becoming weaker and weaker, decaying, having less of a population to watch them, because people are getting information from the internet and getting information from many other places, all the different cables that are exploding. And so, and because people are going there, the culture is moving there. So this is that energy and that resonant energy that is being communicated.
A couple of points. One, I always found it, in fact, this really brought to my attention all of these incredible frames we've got layered over us. And to give me time to sit back and look at all these frames I took as real, and whether or not they were supportive of my life, or if they weren't supportive of my life. And we carry around a ton of these dysfunctional frames that we've just accepted as real.
Yeah.
And addressing another point of Michael, when you have a frame that's more functional and better than the frame below it, and it's a high enough frame where people have their life invested in that meaning, they will not want you to change that.
Yeah.
They will fight you tooth and nail, no matter how much better what you're offering is.
Well, if they're invested in it, yeah.
Heavily invested, yeah.
If they're invested in it. So.
Can you use this model of cultural modeling to predict change and direction in society?
I think we can. I have not pushed it that far yet. I don't know how to do that yet. But I think we can. I think by looking at that, we can predict trends and movements, because we'll have a sense of what meanings people are giving to things that differ from how they have given things meaning to things. As well as we could predict how individuals are using the communication methods and the media and the medium of inside of a culture. And so I think we can get there. I don't have that mapped out yet. I think that's one of the things yet to map out about how to do that. And part of the problem is there's so many variables. And as we keep talking about all the different variables that play into all the cultural frames, that's one of the things that makes it a little difficult. But I think that's possible.
And you mentioned ceremony. Sometimes culture stops doing the ceremony, and at some point they come back to that ceremony to gain more meaning or more strength or something. Why is that? All those other frames wore out, or they're falling apart, or? Well,
like everything, like an individual who may not be using something for a while, and then it weakens, and then they might realize it was doing that. It was thinking that way, reading that stuff, talking that way, acting that way, accessing those states. That's what gave me that sense of what I had, so I'm going to go back. In one way, you can kind of see the American culture. The American culture in the 60s and 70s predicted, there was many predictions on Time magazine and every place else, the death of marriage. Marriage is going to be, by the 21st century, probably most people won't marry anymore. And so there was a lot of that. And so there was less people getting married. So the institutional fact and the ceremonial things weakened. But then people found that that wasn't leading to some of the things that they really wanted for their lives, feeling loved, feeling honored, trusting. And so there's been the recovery. And so cultures breathe and move and just as individuals do.
Look at 9/11, what it did to our culture, and the renewal of the flag. Yesterday it was all over the news.
So we got lots of.
It is spot on to that. Taking a look at the telecom world, we've got a decay system in the integrity of the accounting practices Enron, WorldCom, Adelphi. I mean, the list goes on, which is, in this context of our culture, based on capitalism and the like, is a real big foundational decay.
Exactly. So as things occur, as events occur, as traumatic things occur like 9/11, or as traumatic things occur like people greedily giving themselves millions and millions of dollars and not being honest, not being forthright with bookkeeping and things, this is going to create cultural change. And how we change it sometimes is through legislation, through voting, through withdrawing our monies from things. So there's many factors, many variables that go into how it all plays out.
In the last, I've been here a week, I've spoken to a lot of people who have made choices for their health that have fallen outside the frames that are set in this culture. And I couldn't help but start to chunk up and see how we have frames in the culture for how healthcare should be based upon a model. And I admire all the people who have thought outside the box, and I just couldn't happen to have this come back to me as why so many people won't make choices outside the box. because of all the meaning levels that are set by different drug companies and authorities and physicians and the FDA.
Yeah.
And
so this goes back to
so interesting.
Whoever sets the frames, even at the cultural level, is going to govern the games and the actions and the states and the experiences, which encourages me to think that maybe we need to be more strategic instead of working just at a small level, moving up to thinking in terms of changing large level thinking patterns and beliefs. And one of the reasons I'm more committed now to the writing is that I know that if we can write the novels, if we can write the sitcoms, if we can write the movies, if we get journalists writing, that those are cultural media means, and while most of us are interested in nonfiction works, that is going to have much less influence than some of the other cultural means, because entertainment is a form of how we communicate those kinds of things. And so if we enter that field, well, the entertainment field puts this frame, oh, this is just entertainment. Just a movie. It has none of this violence will have any effect on anybody. None of this horror and seeing people torn up and ripped up will have any effect. None of this hate against other peoples and the kinds of people is going to have any influence on anybody's prejudice. Yeah, we'll run it from the inside out, we'll run it from the top side down, and change some of these frames.
We have him going everywhere.
Is it a safe assumption to say in the bears going up the matrix that when a culture stops growing, it begins to decline and die?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's how cultures die. And we've got many, many examples of national cultures dying and just no longer being useful. And some of this is the natural growth. One of the models that we won't have time to get into today is the spiral dynamics of cultures moving through, I think, about 8 different stages of development. And so cultures naturally die. And as we move further and further, we move up into where instead of being tribal and primitive and in conflict, we recognize we're all members of the same race. Because here's something. Think about the word race. Is there such a thing as different races?
Boston Marathon.
Well,
St. Pikes Peak, Boston Marathon.
Slap them. Yeah, race is totally a human construct, and we base it upon mostly skin color, but sometimes a few other things. But it's totally a human construct because we give it that meaning so that we can make distinctions, so that we make differences, but then we use the differences to create classes, classifications of people better, people less, people superior, people inferior. And so but there's no such thing as a race at the brute fact. There's just people. And all human beings, because we're all the same species, there's just the human race. And I think we'll get over racism when we stop making a lot of those distinctions, and especially with taking the feeling of better, worse, competition, and those kinds of... That's how we create that structure. That's how it exists, and it can only exist as long as people keep using that as their format for how to think about other human beings. There's different families, and there's different family traits. I mean, every single one of us can look at pictures of in our family and say, well, you have his eyes, and you have his hair, and you have his... I mean, it's just family relationships because of the gene pool. But all of our genes intermix and match, so we're all of the human race. So if we want to start dealing with that kind of hatred and bigotry and wars and conflict, it seems to me we go to that higher frame that there's just one race on this planet. We're all in this together, yeah.
Going back to the 2 things that you had spoken about, Michael. One about coaching and setting the frames inside of which people coach. I've been involved with a lot of people changing occupations or changing careers or changing employers, and I know that many times I see people attempting to get a job trying to fit into a culture that's alien to their own highest frames.
Exactly.
And it never works. And then one of the things I discovered along the way was, let's get clear as to what your frames are, and then go find a culture that you can work in, as opposed to trying to fit into a culture that's alien.
Or at least if we know that it's an alien culture, we walk in knowing that, taking that into account, and then maybe being a good change agent inside that culture.
Yeah.
Because cultures can change, even one person. And that's where, when we start looking at how cultures have changed, and we get a Martin Luther King, we get a Gandhi, we get a Jesus, we get someone who enters into a culture and tears it up from inside because greater ideas or the demonstration of another way to be, that they're cultivated their mind and emotions in a different way, and what they do, they're be the change you want to be. You want to start, is what Gandhi said, be the change. So there is power in that kind of a thing. So,
and the second thing was in reference to the cultural frames that get set by the mass media. I think it was yesterday's, there was a headline on the front page of the Denver paper about some heightened activity at DIA, Denver International. This morning's headline right at the top was about shootings at an airport. That's all it said.
L.A., yeah.
It happened to be L.A. if you read the article, but
just at airport.
It just said at airport, and I mean it could have been anywhere. And with the first thing I thought it was DIA because that's what I'd read the day before, and how the usage of that really creates creates this frame of fear that we've been living in since 9/11.
Yeah.
Just a very brief note to add on to what I was going to say, or said, is how the drug companies set the frames way up high with the FDA, with the physicians, and they fund the schools that train the doctors. So they're very good at setting the frames as high as they possibly can.
Yeah. So one of the frames that all of us are up against in any kind of psychological work, whether it's therapy or coaching or managing, is we, in America at least, and I know this is in other places, in America, the frame is, instead of working at running my own brain, changing my own state, just give me a pill. And so the medical model, what Bob and I did in the structure of personality is we took the 14 personality disorders in the DSM-4, which is based upon the medical model, and said maybe this isn't genetic, maybe this isn't totally genetic, maybe this isn't totally physiological, maybe mind plays a part in these disorderings, and so that is an attempt to enter into the system and start. And we're not the only ones, but it's just another one to challenge those higher frames that we're not only physiological beings, that yes, psychoactive drugs do affect us, but our thoughts and feelings also are psychoactive. Thoughts and feelings are psychoactive. Well, they're made out of psycho stuff. So
I can see that as we become, as a group, proficient at affecting change in our culture, that there is a part of our larger group that's going to become threatened and maybe want to exert controls over us or subsume us into their structure.
Yeah. I'm just glad that the days of witch burning and and crucifying and stuff is done. Someone to share my hallucination. David had his hand up.
Well, I have a question. We have the medical model, which seems to be not a very good one. In other words, who puts the money into the medical schools determines far too much. We had 911 and a lot of hype and everything, and it was a tragedy, but there's a 747, the equivalent of a 747 crashing every day, meaning that we have that many mistakes in our medical system killing people, and it doesn't get any play. So how do we get the right play? How do we make the change? How do we go in the right direction? What in the big cultural aspect, how do you make that change?
Okay, good question. And this afternoon when we get looking at cultural change and principles of cultural change and and some of the elements that grab a culture's attention. Because just like at the individual level, things grab our attention, and of course, energy goes where attention energy flows where attention goes, and then we add, as driven by intention, if we want to be intentional and direct the process. So where does the culture's attention go? And why is it every once in a while, one person in the news, suddenly the little girl that's lost in Salt Lake City, or there was a little Jessica years and years ago down a little well, and all of a sudden the whole nation's attention was just on one thing. Whereas there's how many thousands of people dying in car accidents every day, and thousands of people, dying of other things, and so what grabs a culture's attention? And we'll look at some of the things that's been written about that can give us some ideas of how to go about grabbing a nation's attention or a community's attention. Because if we know how some of these processes work, then we can have more ability to affect it. In talking about the medical model, we see some of the other cultural facets like economics. So that what we think and feel about money, and one of the things about group life is that since I don't want to go bake my own bread, and I don't want to go raise my own grain, and raise my own chickens, someone else will do that, and I will exchange what I do, some means of exchange. So money at this level is just exchange, and it means nothing except exchange. But it means exchange in this context, and then I start giving it other meanings, like success, like reward, like power, like control. And it has those legitimate meanings because the more money I have, the more I can influence, I can do things, I can build capital. So if we want to enter into the process, and that's one of the reasons I decided to model wealth building, because if we can't make a decent living, if it isn't financially feasible, it's awful hard to start a movement if it's not financially feasible, because then you're so to be able to make it financially feasible, to run patterns of the mind that are more cost effective than drugs. When we find those patterns and it's more cost effective, and then we can communicate that, then we've got something maybe we can play with. Which is why sometimes it may be more useful for us to say, how much would that change be worth to you? And really stop charging by the hour and start charging by the change. That once we set that up, as people start thinking in terms of what would that be worth it to me, and so Richard Bandler started talking about that way many years ago, and I know many people are already charging by the change rather than by the hour. And when we have quick level changes in moments or minutes or an hour or two or a few sessions, we're going to have to do that to make it financially feasible.
Michael, my experience in that area is now, up to now, everyone I have asked that question, what's it worth for you, particularly as it relates to illness or disease, they have no clue.
Yeah.
And the reason they're clueless is they first of all don't know how much they spend in the current allopathic model. So they don't know what their insurance costs are. They don't know what co-payments are. They say, well, I got to pay $25 or whatever, but they don't know what the sum of that is on an annual basis. The only thing I have found to date that works with is to stop smoking, because I can relate it to the cost of smoking on a per annum basis, and now there's a relationship, and for that they will do it.
So we can take that model, and how much do you spend on allergy medicine? How much would it be worth to run the allergy and have your allergies gone this afternoon?
And that's exactly what I've tried, and they don't even have a clue what their
so
cost.
we have to teach them and inform them how much they've been spending, as well as how much is this misery worth. So there's ways of doing that.
Yeah.
Probably the thing we're trying to put into people's minds that people take the medicine that they're given. I have found as a nurse that 80% of the people do not take the medicine that they have prescribed. When a patient comes in to the hospital and you say, how often are you taking your medicine?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them aren't taking it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
We spent $158.5 million last year in prescription medicine.
Deborah has left now. She left this morning, but as a chiropractor, and especially working with scoliosis, her biggest cultural change is getting the kids when she's going to straighten the back and do that without putting braces and pins inside metal pieces inside the back and do it. The exercises and the processes and wearing braces until the child or the young adult is learning to straighten out the back a little bit more. That's her biggest problem because they've got. So that's at the individual frame, but there's also culture of the family supporting that and making that valuable. So there's all kinds of cultural frames that we're dealing with. Economics plays a significant role in everything that we do, because to be a member of a social group means that that we will exchange or have a barter system of exchange, so that my investment of life energy and activity that has a sense of value, and I can exchange that value. And so the economics, politics is another thing that's, I think, really critical. And it's a place that probably a lot of us have said, just, forget it. If you want to argue about things, it's politics and religion. But there's a structure now to politics. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we had 3 people who want to grow up to be a politician, who's come to our trainings in Metastates. All from South America, it just so happens to be. But that's what they want to do. They want to come, learn how to work at a political level. Well, the word politics just means the polis, the city, the larger level group. And so it's just this set of interactions between us. And so as we find how to do that and how to do persuasion and influence at that level, then politics counts. And the political structures that we set up, and what we've been doing in the culture of neurosemantics, as you're well aware of, is setting up the political structure of abundance, of cooperation, of teamwork, of agreements, of trustworthiness, of trust, of accountability, of conflict resolution, so that the politics, because there's no way to get around politics and political interactions, is to make it overt and make it human, and make it such that it brings out the best in all of us. So as we think about all of this, the cultural frames in our minds and the cultural frames that we deal with as we interact with each other and with different specific cultures, it seems to me one way to start playing with this, and there's an exercise on page 253 that I would like us to do. We'll take a potty break and then we'll get into groups. I saw those. I was calibrating. On page 253, the exercise here is think about something that you would like to model that's a cultural phenomenon. It might be, how does a particular business work, or the coaching business, or if you want to pick out a phenomenon, coaching, fitness, resilience, selling, just any cultural phenomenon. Change management inside of a business, the NLP culture, the neurosemantic culture, American culture, the culture of violence, the culture of victimization, the culture of gangs, whatever culture you want to pick, just to explore it. Then first start asking what X counts as Y. First ground it with a primary state X. What are the brute facts that I'm dealing with? And then, what does that count as? And you'll probably have many different Ys. It counts as this, it counts as that, it counts as this. So we just want to identify some of the beginning structure. When and where does it count as this? Look for the boundaries of this cultural phenomenon. So the context and the context of contexts. And then, how did this X get so classified? When and where and by whom and what way? For what reason, for what purpose, and just all the meta-model questions to explore this X inside of this Y of Y of Y of Y inside of all of that, and there may be many matrices that come out of that. So in thinking in terms of the matrix, we'll have cultural matrices, as it were. So start with something, and then just go explore it, and then how can we unclassify it? How else could we classify? So that's that framing, reframing question, but now in the context of cultural frames. And this will give you just a hands-on kind of sense of this dynamic and what we can do with it. And so some really interesting things have come out in the past when we've played with this. And we just want you to play with it. It's not so much to get some outcome or result, but just to kind of get a sense of this territory and how to map it, how to model it, how to think about it. And I guess one of the overall purposes of the exercise is to recognize it has structure. It has structure, and when you do that, then it demystifies it. It's not such a monolithic, unchangeable, inevitable, because I know those were the feelings I had. Culture is just kind of inevitable. It's just kind of monolithic. I mean, how would you ever enter into it and create some kind of a change influence? So we'll pick that, and you can pick out something as what counts in this particular business, what counts as a promotion, and then trace that out. Or just pick out something that you'd like to begin to explore with somebody. Let's just pair off. If you want to have groups of three people can start brainstorming. This is just a brainstorming, mindstorming kind of a process. But write things out, because you'll go so quickly that tracking it is really important. So get a blank sheet of paper and just start tracking it. See where it goes. And then if you want to try something different, see where that goes. And then when we come back, we'll begin exploring that. So let's take a 10-minute break. You'll have 20 minutes in that small group to play with. We'll blow the whistle, and that'll be lunch hour. And then we will return from 12:30 to 1:45.